Rockford peeks behind a multi-billion-dollar curtain. A former firearms executive speaks out on what he calls a radicalized industry. Others claim a real issue is with the law.
Rock Valley College's annual memorial lecture focused on the national gunfight this year. WYFR's Nathaniel Langley met with attendees fighting for cultural change, while some say the state needs more rights for firearm owners.
Pew Research reports nearly 47,000 people died from gun-related injuries in the U.S. in 2023. The solution to that statistic can divide the nation, but a speaker at RVC says the focus should be on culture.
I think it's really important for people like me, especially, to speak out.
Ryan Bussey takes aim at his former industry.
Some of the best days of my life have been spent in and around guns, and I still feel that means we have an immense responsibility.
The former executive at Kimber America sold millions of guns. Now, he offers a warning in a lecture at Rock Valley College.
The firearms industry played a central role, especially in the extremism of our country, and I think gun violence is kind of a spillover effect.
There is a good amount of violence with guns here, and it's just not as talked about sometimes.
RVC student Eli Hernandez hopes to hear lessons for his hometown of Rockford.
I'm kind of interested in seeing other people's who's researched the topic, their thoughts.
Bussey claims there's an imbalance. To the Montana native, firearm companies disregard gun rights and responsibility.
If we get to fixing our culture, laws and regulations, that will fix itself, but we have a broken culture in our country.
Firearms companies don't really play any role in that.
Advocates for gun rights argue Illinois' real problem is encroaching regulations.
You have to realize what's coming down the road. There's never enough with these people.
For the former executive, a solution starts with better marketing for tools meant to take lives.
The way you handle it, the way you sell it, the way you market it should be balanced with responsibility.
Bussey didn't wish to specifically comment on Illinois' gun laws. He repeated the priority remains with addressing firearm culture across the country.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Tonight's lecture is in honor of David H. Caskey, who died in 2007. He was the first president of Rock Valley College and a former political science professor.